bowl has been sitting there for 3 days. Nobody planned this. Nobody's watching it. It's just a clay vessel half filled with crushed grain and rainwater, forgotten in the corner of a crude shelter somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, 10,000 years ago. The sun beats down, the grain swells, the water clouds. Something is happening inside that bowl, something invisible, something that will change human history forever. Bubbles rise to the surface. The liquid fizzes softly. A strange, sweet smell fills the air. A woman passes by. She's thirsty. The water looks wrong, cloudy, but she's thirsty enough not to care. She drinks. Her face twists. It tastes strange, sour, a little sweet, kind of good. She drinks more. 10 minutes later, she's giggling at nothing. Her movements are loose, confident. She says something bold to a man she's been too shy to approach for weeks. The group stares. She never acts like this. Another person tries the bowl, then another. By sunset, the camp is chaos. Laughter, dancing, arguments, confessions, someone's crying, someone's kissing. 2 people are definitely about to fight. This was the first time humans got drunk, and nothing would ever be the same. Before we dive into what might be the most important accident in human history, do yourself a favor. If you've ever looked at a bottle of beer, a piece of bread, or a chunk of cheese, and wondered how the hell humans figured that out, hit subscribe. Because every week we're uncovering the bizarre, messy, beautiful accidents that built civilization. Trust me, you're not ready for what fermentation did to our species. Now let's go back to that bowl. Here's what you need to understand about early humans. We were hungry, constantly, obsessively. Food wasn't something you enjoyed. It was something you desperately sought, fought over, and tried not to die without. So we hoarded. Grain was revolutionary. You could store it, stack it, keep it for the lean times. Unlike meat, it didn't rot in a day. It was security. It was survival. But grain had a problem. It needed water to become edible. You had to soak it, mash it, turn it into something your teeth could handle. So picture this. Somewhere in the Middle East, maybe 12,000 years ago, a small group of humans has figured out how to harvest wild grains. They're not farming yet, not quite, but they're collecting seeds, storing them in clay pots, hide bags, hollowed logs. They soak the grain to soften it, mix it with water, let it sit while they deal with other tasks, hunting, gathering, keeping children from getting eaten by leopards, the usual. Sometimes they forget about a bowl. Life is chaotic, memories are short. And then something miraculous happens. Invisible organisms floating in the air, microscopic life forms that have existed for millions of years, land in that forgotten bowl. They're called yeast. These organisms eat the sugars in the grain, and when they eat, they produce waste, carbon dioxide and alcohol. The bowl begins to bubble, to foam, to transform. The first person to drink this probably did it by accident, maybe by necessity. Water was precious. You didn't waste it just because it looked weird. But the taste, oh, the taste. It wasn't spoiled, it wasn't rotten. It was different, complex, sweet and sour and strange. And then, a few minutes later, something even stranger happened. The world got softer. Your thoughts got louder, funnier. Your body felt warm, loose. Tensions you'd been carrying for days just melted. You started talking more, laughing more. That person you were angry with, suddenly forgiving them seemed easy. That thought you'd been too scared to say out loud, it just came out. And everyone around you started acting the same way. This wasn't food. This was something else entirely. This was magic. But here's the thing. That first drunk human had no framework for understanding this. No concept of intoxication. No word for drunk. They just knew that this liquid changed them, changed everyone who drank it. Some of them probably thought they were possessed, touched by spirits, cursed, blessed, transformed. And they were right. They were transformed, just not by spirits. By yeast. Tiny fungal organisms doing what they'd been doing for millions of years, completely unaware that they were about to become humanity's oldest collaborator. The next morning, of course, reality crashed back in. Headaches, nausea, regret. The world's first hangover arrived right alongside the world's first buzz. Someone probably swore they'd never drink that cursed grain water again. They were lying. Because here's the thing about that first drunk experience. It felt good, really good. And humans, for better or worse, are absolutely terrible at resisting things that feel good. So they tried to recreate it. They soaked more grain, left it out, waited. Some bowls worked, some didn't. The process was mysterious, unreliable. Sometimes the liquid made you feel amazing. Sometimes it made you sick. Sometimes it did nothing at all. They didn't know why. They didn't know that wild yeast strains varied. That temperature mattered. That cleanliness affected the outcome. That sometimes harmful bacteria got there first and created something toxic instead of intoxicating. But through trial and error, through dozens of accidental poisonings and successful buzzes, they started to notice patterns. Certain grains worked better, certain vessels, certain times of year. They were learning, domesticating an invisible process through pure observation and repetition. And slowly, very slowly, fermentation stopped being an accident. It became intentional. Someone figured out that if you saved a little bit of the successful batch and added it to the next one, it worked more reliably. They were cultivating yeast without knowing yeast existed. Someone else noticed that keeping the vessel covered kept out the flies and the filth, better flavor, fewer sick people. Another person discovered that adding certain plants changed the taste, made it bitter or sweeter or stronger. This was chemistry, microbiology, food science, being developed by people who couldn't read or write, who had no concept of germs or fermentation, who were just trying to recreate that feeling of warmth and looseness and joy. The knowledge spread, not through books or teachers, through taste, through experience, through one person sharing their successful batch with another and saying, basically, I have no idea how I did this, but try it. And those early brewers, they became important, valuable. The person who could consistently make the magic grain water had status, power. People wanted to be around them, wanted to trade with them, wanted to learn from them. Intoxication was becoming social currency. But nobody was prepared for what happened when you got an entire community drunk at the same time. Let's be honest about what alcohol does to humans. It doesn't just make you tipsy. It rewires your social operating system. It takes all those little fears and hesitations and social calculations that usually govern behavior, and it turns them way, way down. Now imagine that happening to a group of early humans who have never experienced this before, who have no cultural framework for drunk behavior, no rules, no rituals, no one to say, hey, maybe that's enough. It was absolute chaos. The first time an entire community got drunk together probably looked like a combination of a religious experience, a therapy session, and a bar fight. People started talking, really talking, saying things they'd been holding back for months, years. That hunting slight from last season suddenly needed to be addressed, right now, loudly. That attraction someone had been quietly harboring, confessed, publicly, with witnesses. That grief over a lost child, finally expressed, tears flowing in front of the whole group. Inhibitions, those crucial social guardrails that keep communities from tearing themselves apart, were just gone. Some of this was beautiful, people bonding in ways they never had before, sharing vulnerabilities, laughing until their sides hurt, dancing with an abandon that sober life never permitted. For the first time, humans were experiencing collective euphoria, synchronized joy, everyone feeling the same strange warmth at the same time. It was intoxicating in more ways than one. But some of it was destructive, Old rivalries surfaced with new intensity. Jealousies erupted into violence. People made decisions drunk that sober them would never have made. Relationships formed that probably shouldn't have. Others ended that maybe needed to. And through all of it, everyone was learning. This substance has power over mood, over judgment, over the entire social fabric of the group. The elders, watching this chaos unfold, probably had very mixed feelings. On one hand, they were seeing their people connect in unprecedented ways. Barriers were breaking down. People were being honest, vulnerable, human. On the other hand, someone just tried to fight the best hunter over something that happened 3 years ago, and now they might not eat tomorrow. Decisions had to be made. When do we drink this? Who gets to drink it? How much? What happens if someone goes too far? The first alcohol regulations were being born, not written down, not formalized, but understood, negotiated, enforced. Maybe drinking only happened on certain occasions, after a successful hunt, during seasonal gatherings, when the moon was full. Maybe certain people were excluded. Children, obviously, maybe pregnant women, maybe people with violent tendencies. Maybe there were consequences for bad drunk behavior, shame, ostracism, loss of future drinking privileges. These weren't laws, they were survival strategies, because groups that couldn't manage intoxication tore themselves apart, and groups that could, they discovered something profound. Alcohol made them closer, not just during the drinking, after the shared experience, the shared vulnerability, the shared hangovers. People who got drunk together bonded in ways that sober interaction never achieved. They'd seen each other without masks, without pretense, raw and real and ridiculous. That created trust, intimacy, social cohesion. And in a world where survival depended on cooperation, where a fractured group meant death, anything that strengthened bonds was valuable beyond measure. So despite the chaos, despite the fights and the bad decisions and the morning regrets, humans kept drinking. Because it worked, it brought them together, made them feel things, express things, experience things that sober life kept locked away. And somewhere in all this drunken chaos, someone had an idea. What if we made this special, sacred? What if we turned drinking into a ritual instead of just letting it happen? The very first ceremony, involving alcohol, probably looked insane by modern standards. Dancing, chanting, offerings to forces they didn't understand, thanking the spirits that lived in the grain water, begging them to return, to make the next batch just as powerful. They were worshiping fermentation, without knowing what fermentation was. And it worked, not because the spirits were listening, but because ritual created structure, context, meaning. Drinking wasn't just getting drunk anymore. It was communion, connection, transcendence. The grain water became sacred, and the people who knew how to make it, they became shamans, priests, keepers of divine knowledge. Which, in a way, they were. They were collaborating with invisible life forms to transform ordinary grain into something extraordinary. They were performing miracles. They just didn't know the miracles were happening at a microscopic level. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because while all this drunken bonding and ritual making was happening, someone noticed something else. The grain they were using for alcohol, it grew better near their camps. Bigger, more abundant, easier to harvest. And humans were starting to wonder, what if we didn't just collect this grain? What if we planted it, controlled it, made sure we always had enough for the magic water? What if we stayed in one place just to keep making beer? This is where things get controversial and fascinating and possibly civilization changing. Here's the story you probably learned. Humans invented agriculture to grow food, to create stable, reliable nutrition, to stop wandering and start building. Bread before beer, survival before pleasure. Makes sense, right? Logical, responsible, very human. But there's another theory, a wild, compelling, heavily debated theory that flips the whole script. What if humans domesticated grain not for bread, but for beer? What if the first farms weren't about feeding stomachs, but about feeding that craving for intoxication, for ritual, for the social bonding that alcohol provided? Stay with me here. Think about what early agriculture demanded: backbreaking labor, staying in one place, giving up the freedom of nomadic life, defending territory, storing surplus, dealing with crop failures and droughts and pests. For bread, maybe. Bread is useful, nutritious, storable. But bread is also boring and hard to make. And early bread was basically edible cardboard that kept you alive but didn't exactly inspire devotion. Beer, though, beer was magic. Beer brought the tribe together. Beer created experiences that nothing else could. Beer was the liquid that made you feel connected to forces beyond yourself. Beer was worth staying in one place for. Now this is speculative. We can't prove it. The evidence is circumstantial, archaeological, open to interpretation. But consider this. Some of the earliest evidence of grain cultivation appears alongside evidence of brewing. Residue in ancient pottery. Grain storage that exceeds what a small group would need for food alone. And then there are the ancient texts. Once writing appears, we have records, lots of records about beer. The Sumerians had a goddess of beer, Ninkasi. They had hymns to her, recipes, regulations. Beer was everywhere in their culture, central, sacred, essential. The ancient Egyptians paid workers in beer, built the pyramids on a beer-fueled labor force. Children drank beer. Adults drank beer. Everyone drank beer because the water was often unsafe and beer was purified through fermentation. But beer came first in their writings, before bread, before most other foods. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe alcohol was so important, so central to early human society, that we literally restructured our entire way of life around ensuring we could always make it. Because here's the thing about fermentation. It requires surplus. You can't make beer if you're eating every grain you harvest. You need extra, abundance. And abundance requires planning, storage, agriculture. So maybe the logic went like this. We need beer for our rituals, our bonding, our connection to the divine. To make beer, we need lots of grain. To get lots of grain, we need to grow it. To grow it, we need to stay here and tend it. And just like that, agriculture happens. Not because we wanted bread, because we wanted beer. The farms that fed civilizations might have started as breweries. We chose to stay in one place, to work harder, to create surplus, partly because we tasted something that made life feel bigger than mere survival. That first drunk human, giggling over a bowl of fermented grain, set in motion a chain of events that led to farms, villages, cities, civilization. Or at least, that's one way to tell the story. But fermentation didn't stop with beer. Because once humans figured out that you could transform food with invisible processes, that you could make things change and improve and last, we went absolutely wild with it. Once you understand that food can transform, that invisible forces can change grain into something better, your whole relationship with eating shifts. You start experimenting, testing, observing what happens when you leave things alone. Milk, for instance. Milk spoils fast, dangerously fast in hot climates. You have maybe a day before it's toxic sludge. But if you let it spoil in just the right way, with just the right organisms, something miraculous happens. It thickens, sours, becomes yogurt, or cheese, or kefir. And suddenly milk isn't a one-day resource anymore. It's a food you can keep, trade, transport, build an entire diet around. The first person to eat deliberately soured milk must have been either desperate or insane, possibly both. But they tried it and they didn't die, and it tasted good, tangy, rich, completely different from fresh milk but somehow better. Word spread, techniques developed. Different regions, different climates, different containers all produced different results. The Mongolians made arag from fermented mare's milk. The Scandinavians made skyr. The Middle Eastern cultures made lebne. Everyone was fermenting milk in their own unique ways. And then there was bread. Real bread, not the flat, dense cakes that early grain eaters made, but risen bread, light, airy, soft. Someone noticed that when beer foam was added to grain mash, the dough bubbled, rose, transformed in the heat into something extraordinary. Yeast, again. The same organisms making beer were making bread rise. But the bread makers didn't know that. They just knew that saving some dough from the last batch and adding it to the new one made magic happen. Sourdough starters were born, kept alive for generations, passed down like heirlooms. Some cultures believed the starter held ancestral spirits, family legacy in a jar of bubbling dough. They weren't entirely wrong. Each starter was unique, a culture, a living thing, millions of organisms working together to transform flour and water into food. Fermentation became a cornerstone of survival, not just for flavor, for preservation. Vegetables rotted within days, but fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, they lasted months, years, provided vitamins through brutal winters when nothing fresh existed. Meat spoiled even faster, but cured fermented meat, salami, prosciutto, dried sausages that could hang in cellars for seasons. Fish, same story. Fermented fish sauce became a staple across Asia. Garum in ancient Rome was fermented fish guts, and it was considered a delicacy, the ketchup of the ancient world. Humans were building entire cuisines around controlled rot. Which sounds disgusting until you realize that most of the foods you love are fermented. Chocolate, coffee, vanilla, soy sauce, hot sauce, olives, sourdough, cheese, wine, beer, vinegar, pickles. All of it fermentation. The invisible organisms that accidentally got our ancestors drunk became our greatest culinary collaborators. But this wasn't just about food. This was about understanding, about humans learning to work with nature instead of just taking from it. You couldn't control it completely. The organisms did what they wanted, but you could create conditions, encourage outcomes, guide the process. This required observation, patience, pattern recognition, scientific thinking, even if nobody called it that. The best fermenters became essential to their communities. Their knowledge was power, their products were wealth, and their understanding, even if incomplete, was revolutionary. They knew that certain conditions produced certain results, that temperature mattered, that cleanliness mattered, that timing was everything. They were doing microbiology without microscopes, chemistry without formulas, food science without labs. Just humans and invisible life, learning to collaborate. And that collaboration was about to build civilizations. Let's talk about what fermentation actually gave us, not just the products, the structure. Beer and wine required surplus grain and fruit. Surplus required agriculture. Agriculture required settlement. Settlement required organization. You can't just have everyone making beer whenever they want. Someone has to grow the grain. Someone has to store it. Someone has to control the fermentation. Someone has to distribute the results. Hierarchies formed around fermentation. Priests who controlled the sacred brewing, merchants who traded the surplus, farmers who grew the grain, workers who labored for beer rations. The first economies were partly built on fermented goods, the first wage systems, the first taxation, the first recorded transactions. Beer and bread weren't just food, they were currency, social glue, political tools. Kings threw feasts with unlimited beer to secure loyalty. Temples brewed sacred alcohol to fund operations. Workers demanded beer as payment because it was reliable value. And religion and fermentation became inseparable. Because how else do you explain transformation? How else do you understand that grain and water, left alone, become something that changes consciousness? It had to be divine, the work of God's sacred magic. Every culture developed fermentation rituals, offerings to brewing deities, ceremonies around the first drink, prayers over the fermenting vessels. Wine became the blood of gods, bread became the body, literal transformation as religious metaphor. The Sumerians had Ninkasi, the Egyptians had Osiris, the Greeks had Dionysus. Every civilization worshipped the forces that brought them fermentation. Invisible organisms working together to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, to preserve food, to create consciousness-altering experiences, to bind communities together. That is miraculous. And humans, not knowing the science, created meaning around it, built cultures around it, shaped civilizations around it. Fermentation taught us patience, that some things can't be rushed, that transformation takes time. It taught us observation, that paying attention to subtle changes yields understanding. It taught us collaboration, that working with forces you don't control can produce better results than domination. It taught us that the invisible world matters, that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not real, powerful, essential. Early humans working with fermentation were developing skills that would define our species: abstract thinking, long-term planning, scientific observation, cultural transmission of knowledge. All because we wanted to get drunk, and then because we wanted to keep getting drunk, and then because we realized these invisible processes could do so much more than just intoxicate us. Fermentation became the foundation of food security, of social bonding, of religious experience, of economic systems. The bowl of forgotten grain didn't just give us beer, it gave us civilization. Think about that first human who tasted fermented grain water. Thirsty, curious, probably a little reckless. They had no idea what they were drinking, no concept of yeast or alcohol or biochemistry. They just knew it tasted strange and made them feel different. And in that moment, in that first sip, something profound happened. Humans discovered we could collaborate with invisible life, that we could guide natural processes, that we could transform the world instead of just surviving in it. We learned to be patient with processes we didn't understand, to observe, to experiment, to pass knowledge across generations. We learned that some of the best things in life come from letting go, from allowing transformation to happen in its own time, from trusting invisible forces to do their work. That's what fermentation taught us. That's what that first drunk human set in motion. Not just a buzz, not just a hangover, but a fundamental shift in how our species relates to the world. We partnered with bacteria and yeast and molds to build cuisines, economies, cultures, civilizations. All because someone, somewhere, forgot about a bowl of grain, and then drank it anyway. The invisible organisms that got our ancestors drunk are still working with us today. In your sourdough starter, in your yogurt, in your beer and wine and cheese and coffee and chocolate. Every fermented food is a continuation of that ancient collaboration. Every bite is humanity working with invisible life to create something neither could make alone. And if you're sitting here thinking about all the everyday miracles you've been taking for granted, all the invisible processes that make your life possible, all the forgotten moments that changed everything, then you're exactly where you should be. Hit that subscribe button, because every week we're diving into another one of these origin stories. The strange accidents, the wild experiments, the moments that built the world you live in without you ever knowing it happened. Next time, we're exploring how humans figured out they could eat poison, on purpose, for fun. You're not ready. But I think you're going to want to see it.